Okay, we're going to look at key points in the Nietzsche chapter, starting with the madman and the death of God, which is a parable about the alarming erosion of religious belief in Western Europe. And Nietzsche is really one of the first, if not the first, philosopher to recognize the shift, the paradigm shift in religious belief in the mid to late 19th century in Europe. He noticed, before most other thinkers noticed, that the belief in God, the deep spiritual commitment to Christianity that had been a fixture in Western Europe for centuries had begun to decline precipitously. So when Nietzsche talks about the death of God, he doesn't mean the literal death of God. Of course, he doesn't mean that. He means the death of belief in God. So you'll recall from the St. Thomas chapter that for Christians there is such a thing as a summum bonum, which is literally a highest good in Latin. The highest good for a human being, for a Christian, would be eternal life and salvation in the bosom of Christ. These are the highest objects of human desire. And the problem with the death of God, or with the erosion of religious belief, is that we no longer have an object that is so transcendent and noble and high and great to strive after. So our vision, our horizon has been diminished to such an extent that we have replaced what for Nietzsche are the bourgeois or middle class virtues of thrift, industry, money-making, physical pleasure, the avoidance of pain, and so forth. We've replaced the noble with the base. We've taken God out of the picture. We've taken eternal life out of the picture. We've taken salvation out of the picture and put in its place the tax accountant and his middle class lifestyle with his TV dinners and football games and petty little existence, right? And that this has really caused a catastrophic effect on the human psyche, on human civilization, right? The Hobbesian desire for comfortable self-preservation is, in Nietzsche's view, extremely petty, extremely low when you compare it to the desire for eternal life, for example. And that has ushered in an era of what Nietzsche calls slave morality. We'll get into that in a moment. And I have to agree that there's something true about his analysis about the death of God. If you go into the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, for example, you will see mainly tourists, very few worshipers. It's become a kind of museum, not unlike the Parthenon in Athens is today. If you go to the Parthenon, which is a Greek temple dedicated to the goddess Athena, who's the patron goddess of Athens, it is now completely museum-like. It's a tourist attraction. Nobody believes in Zeus anymore. Nobody believes in Athena anymore. And Nietzsche is saying we're moving in that direction with respect to Christianity. And it is ushering in a phenomenon known as nihilism, which we'll get to in the next slide. So the problem with getting God out of the picture is that we no longer have an eternal and transcendent standard of good and evil. At least we no longer have the belief in an eternal and transcendent standard of good and evil. There is no eternal law, to use St. Thomas's term. And Nietzsche is an atheist, so he never believed in an eternal law or in divine providence. But he's saying that the human psyche, the human soul, if you will, can only thrive and flourish if it has some kind of belief system that is transcendent and eternal. some kind of, even if it's an illusion, the illusion is necessary in order to have psychological health and stability. So when you wipe God out of the horizon of meaning, you are left with a huge void, an emptiness. And this is essentially what he means by nihilism. Nihilism is literally nothingism. It is a bleak view of the universe. Basically, a nihilist would say that the world is utterly meaningless. There is no God. There is no meaning to the universe. There is no human nature. There's no standard of how to live. There's no truth about the human good. The world is utterly chaotic and absurd. And this sentiment it's not new. It's existed here and there for centuries, for millennia, but it's becoming prevalent, according to Nietzsche, starting in the late 19th century. And the nihilistic worldview, if you will, is captured nicely in these lines from a Shakespeare play. Life is but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. That really captures the essence of nihilism. A nihilist has no reason to get up in the morning, has no place to go, has no purpose or direction in life. Suicide is really the only option for a nihilist. Of course, you can commit suicide in an instant, or you could do it over the course of a lifetime. Many nihilists choose the latter, and they pursue whatever pleasures they can get hold of. So nihilism is often accompanied by hedonism. Physical pleasure is often the only satisfaction that a nihilist can possibly find in life. And it's not much of a satisfaction, of course, but it's usually all that they have, since they don't believe in anything greater than themselves. So Nietzsche recognizes that nihilism is a very, very destructive worldview, and that we have to find a way to combat it. And he has a way to do it, which I'll get to in a moment. So for Nietzsche, human beings are not equal. This is one of the biggest points of contrast between Nietzsche and other philosophers of his time, and certainly from Christians. Nietzsche believes that human beings are radically unequal, that you have the few great-souled beings, and then you have everybody else, and everybody else is at the bottom. And Nietzsche argues that great societies emerge out of this view that the aristocrats, the great-souled men, ought to rule, and everyone else ought to be subject to the rule of these noble-souled individuals. In other words, he believes in an aristocratic society. Aristocratic means rule by the best, and the best are always few in number. So Nietzsche is vehemently opposed to egalitarianism. Egalitarianism is the view that champions fundamental equality, that all human beings are equal and they should be treated equally. Nietzsche believes that is not a self-evident truth, but rather a self-evident lie. So how do aristocratic societies come into being? Well, through conquest. Nietzsche gives us an image here. He says, men with a still natural nature, barbarians in every terrible sense of the word, men of prey, still in possession of unbroken strength of will and desire for power, threw themselves upon weaker, more moral, more peaceful races. So you can see the imagery here is that of a beast of prey attacking some weak, defenseless creature and possessing it, killing it. So this is not a pretty picture here, but Nietzsche is saying that, look, this is how the world really is. This is how human beings really are. You can see the truth of it and accept it, or you can turn away from it and look for some illusion that gives you a picture of the world that is pretty, even if it's false. Now, for Nietzsche, the will to power is what distinguishes the aristocratic or noble men from everyone else. The will to power is an interesting concept in Nietzsche. It basically signifies a life force that every living thing possesses to some degree. It's a vitality, a fire that burns in us, that makes us living things. He describes it as essentially appropriation, which means to take something, to expand, to exploit one's environment. That's what it means to appropriate. Injury, conquest of the strange and weak. Suppression, which means to keep something down, to contain it. Severity, and at the least, putting it mildest, exploitation. And exploitation, of course, means to take advantage of something, to possess what is external to you and incorporate it into yourself. And it has an implication of violence. So as I pointed out earlier, all living things for Nietzsche, from the amoeba all the way up to the human being and even whole societies, exhibit this vital life force known as the will to power. Now, as I also pointed out earlier, not everyone has it to the same degree. Right? A light bulb that is fading, that is dim, still has light, but not nearly as much as compared with a light bulb that is burning intensely. That's the same principle we're working with here, right? Aristocratic individuals or noble or superior types of human beings have the will to power in a much greater degree and to a greater intensity than do slavish human beings. And he says that exploitation, although it's viewed disparagingly, especially among Christians and among egalitarians, Nietzsche is saying that it is essential to the flourishing of the best that nature gives us. There's nothing depraved about it. In fact, exploitation is identical with the will to life. Now, this is a hard truth to accept, but Nietzsche says boldly, he says, the truth is hard. Now, let's turn briefly to the two fundamental types of morality that Nietzsche discovers. Now, Nietzsche was trained as a classicist, which means he studied dead languages, in particular Greek and Latin. He was an expert. And he had a historical sense that goes back 10,000 years. And he was a great scholar who understood and had studied different moral systems that existed throughout civilized history. And he discovers that there are two basic strands or types of morality that have ever existed. And these are master morality and slave morality. Master morality has always originated in a noble or aristocratic caste. And slave morality has always originated among the lower strata of society. Now, there are two value terms in each morality. The value terms in master morality are good and bad. According to Nietzsche, the aristocratic or superior man, and one finds example of these types of men in the Roman, Arabic, German, and Japanese nobility, according to Nietzsche, as well as among the Scandinavian Vikings and the heroes of the Homeric epic poems, that this superior type of man conceives the idea of good spontaneously and straight away, that is to say, out of himself. He honors whatever he recognizes in himself. Such morality is self-glorification. So apparently for Nietzsche, the term good and master morality is synonymous with all of the qualities possessed by the noble or aristocratic man. Now, what are these qualities? So the qualities are strength, nobility, pride, self-discipline, self-mastery. A superior man is a master of himself. He's not a slave to his appetites. He governs himself, right? He's courageous. He's not afraid. He's ambitious. He strives to be excellent. He strives to be better than he is. So these are all the qualities that make one noble. And these qualities combined constitute the term good in master morality. Bad, on the other hand, is more of an afterthought. It is the absence of the good qualities. So just think for a moment about all the good qualities in aristocratic morality, and then look at their opposites, and their opposites would constitute bad. So let's read a passage at the bottom here from Nietzsche. The bad would constitute the cowardly, the timid, the insignificant, those thinking of narrow utility, as well as the distrustful, the self-abasing, the dog-like kind of men who let themselves be abused, the mendicant flatterers, and above all, the liars. At the end of the day, good and bad in master morality are synonyms with noble and despicable. So the noble is high and the despicable is low. So when the despicable is that which is worthy of being despised. And when you despise something, you're looking down on it because it is beneath you. So that essentially sums up the value terms good and bad in master morality. Now, slave morality, by contrast, originates in resentment. The resentment experienced by the abused, the oppressed, the suffering, the unemancipated, the weary, and those uncertain of themselves, who are scared to death at the power and dangerousness, the dreadfulness and strength of the noble caste, and who, deprived as they are of the proper outlet of action, are forced to find their compensation in an imaginary revenge. So resentment is an interesting passion. It's a species of hatred. And when you resent something, you're looking up. You're from a position of inferiority, and you're looking up with hatred in your eyes towards something or someone that you recognize as being superior to yourself. And you wish it harm. So resentment is a kind of slavish passion because it is the hatred of something that is superior, that is higher than you. Whereas scorn would be a feeling of disgust towards something that is beneath you. When you scorn or despise something, you are in a position of superiority looking down on something that you recognize as beneath you. So a slavish type of soul is incapable of feeling scorn or incapable of despising something because the slave is looking up from the depths, and therefore resentment is the proper passion for the slave. So again, the slaves resent all of those qualities possessed by the noble or aristocratic souls that make them great. The slaves resent and fear their courageousness, their strength, their self-discipline, their pride, their ferocity, their self-assertion, their ambition. These are all qualities that the slaves not only do not have or are incapable of having, but fear and resent. So there are a lot of hateful and destructive passions that are felt against these noble types of beings by the slaves. So what happens then? What are the value terms in slave morality? Well, they are good and evil. So the slaves elevate themselves to the status of good in slave morality. So all the qualities that the slaves represent are elevated to the status of good. And all of the qualities that the nobles or aristocrats represent are denigrated, are lowered to the status of evil. So if you look at the fourth bullet point from the top, the diffident, slavish man, represented by modern egalitarians who believe almost instinctively in progress and the future, desires nothing more than comfort and safety. So here Nietzsche criticizes implicitly Hobbes and his whole modern project of providing the conditions for the advancement of and the flourishing of comfortable self-preservation as the new ideal, the new goal for humanity. He completely criticizes that as being worthy of slaves. An aristocratic man does not seek comfort and safety. He seeks danger. He wants obstacles to overcome. He wants to vanquish against his competitors, against the world. He wants to rule, right? For Nietzsche, the aristocratic types of souls are those that raise the bar for humanity. They create great civilizations. They want risk and danger. They're risk takers. That's why Nietzsche despises slave morality, because it lowers everything. It lowers the standards for everything. It degrades culture. It degrades civilization. And it is the reigning morality of our time, at least according to Nietzsche. Now, the question is, can that be overcome? Will that ever change? Well, for that, you'd have to read up on Nietzsche's concept of the overman, who is also the philosopher of the future. Now, we will not be covering that in this chapter. That is something that you will have to get into on your own time, and I encourage you to do so. Thank you for listening.